It's been a really nice week in crypto as we've started to see it break out of some major levels of resistance after seeing it sell off for several weeks straight, which is of course always a good sign. So we'll have to see kind of how long this continues and what we see going into the following weeks. Now, of course, there's still some potential concerns here sitting on the horizon. We are going to be talking about those. And we are also going to be talking about what we're seeing currently from both Bitcoin, the move up that we've seen there, and how this specifically impacts some of our favorite altcoins and what we could be seeing coming from the altcoin market here very soon. So let's go on ahead and let's just take a look at kind of what we're looking at in the market overall today and what we could see next. So first off, here on the daily, as you can see, a pretty nice move to the upside, Mix having a decent move to the downside, but basically everything else in the market going up. We can see things like Doge up almost 5%, Solana up almost 5%, Crow up almost 10%, Hyperliquid almost 5%. I mean, a really nice spread through the market, appearing to be kind of about an average of about 5% moving to the upside here, which I do think is a really good thing to see. We are also back to a green week with actually a quite green week happening here with FTN, Saros, IMX, and XPL being the ones that are kind of moving down. Basically everything else moving up here, with Zcash actually having a really strong move to the upside here. So we can see we are back to a green day, week, month, and year chart here on the crypto bubbles, which is good to see. If we do look at the Bitcoin chart, we can see kind of it's pretty clear as to why this is happening. We're seeing a very strong move to the upside here, which I think is good to see, because obviously, you know, we had a little bit of a sell-off here on Bitcoin. Of course, you know, we did start to see some support forming here and then a move back to the upside, which is of course good to see. We had actually a pretty violent move over the past couple of days, basically moving from about 114,000 to about 118,500 just in one day. People claiming that this is being a little bit of a Bitcoin short squeeze. Now, what we can see here is we are kind of coming up towards the top of the Bollinger Bands here, and there is that possibility that we are entering into a little bit of a descending channel. Again, seeing something maybe happening like this, like that, or maybe we see something happening a little bit more like that and we do break out of this descending channel. Again, kind of maybe looking somewhere like that roughly. So again, hard to say exactly for sure what type of structure we're in right now, but hopefully you can see kind of roughly what we would be looking at. Now, maybe we do see this breakout. Maybe we continue to see this to run up, approaching toward all-time highs. Maybe we see it move to the downside. There's a couple of different arguments for both. We're going to be talking about both here, so stick around if you are interested. But while we were seeing a little bit of this pullback happening, obviously, you know, there's a lot of fear in the market. There was a lot of people saying, oh, well, this is it. The market's over. We've topped. This is officially the end of the bull market. And this is all, of course, happening towards the end of September, which is generally not a good time for the crypto market. And we're seeing this start to bounce here in October, again, heading into Uptober. A lot of this, again, being very like well-trodden narratives. So just be very careful with those types of things, as sometimes they play out, sometimes they doesn't, or sometimes they don't. You can see here, basically, we moved up the entire month of November with selling off of a pretty aggressive sell-off here happening towards the end. And then now, you know, I'm potentially seeing we could see something kind of opposite happening here, where we see a really strong move to the upside here in October, and then maybe see a little bit of a downsell or a downside kind of running into the end of October, because people are expecting October to do well. Now, generally, Q4 is very strong for crypto, so I do think that any moves to the downside that we do see will likely be fairly limited and fairly isolated, just to trap liquidity, because there is a ton of it here moving to the downside. If you're following the channel, this is probably not going to be too much of a surprise to you, what I'm about to show you, because you probably have a general inkling for this, because we've been talking about it and we've been monitoring it, and particularly in situations like this. When we see such a violent move to the upside like this in such a short amount of time, you can see on the Bitcoin exchange liquidation map on the daily, there is a little bit of a bias towards moving back to the downside and liquidating longs, again, because we have seen such a strong move to the upside. Now, you might see this, and you know, you'll see about 3 billion in one direction and about 2.25 in the other. But if you start to look at the 7 and the 30 day, you'll see an absolutely insane spread spread here with about 14.5 or $14.25 billion to the downside and only about 2.3 billion to the upside, with similar numbers showing on the 30-day with about, what is this, about 3.75 billion, so 3.75 billion to the upside, and then about $18.5 billion to the downside to be liquidated. So there's definitely a bunch of money to be lost on the downside, and I do think that we do, potentially see some moves back to the downside to wipe some of that liquidity. Now, one thing that I will say, you never can assume that something is going to be different this time, but one thing that I will say is potentially a possibility of being different this time is it does feel like the volatility in Bitcoin has dropped fairly dramatically. We still do get a lot of that volatility happening within the altcoins, but Bitcoin really does feel like it's lost a lot of that violent movement pressure that we have seen at periods in the past. It does seem to be a lot more stable, a lot more solid, and so potentially we don't see any sort of flash crashes or major wicks that we have seen before in the past, because right now we're sitting at about 120,000. A 20% move would drop us all the way back to $100,000. We've seen that before in crypto over the span of 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And so to me, that normally wouldn't be something that's super unusual, but we really haven't seen moves like this probably since April, and that was when we were seeing similar moves happening in the stock market, which was a very unusual time in the market. So I'm not necessarily counting on that type of volatility that we have seen in the past, but again, maybe that is something that we see happening. Now, again, as I had mentioned, if we take a look at the Bitcoin chart here, I did actually go in long as we were towards the bottom here and we started to establish a bottom, because of course, if it's not already obvious, buying when it's low and selling when it's high is generally a good idea, and we could see that we were getting overextended here on the Bollinger Bands, and now we actually are getting a little bit overextended on the Bollinger Bands to the upside. I did open a Bitcoin long trade on Weex when we did actually have this kind of move starting. Because I'm in Singapore this week, I'm actually not able to show you the trade that I have open because it's blacklisted here in Singapore, but it's up about 40 or 50% at this point. So I'm feeling pretty good with that move. I will be taking some profits just to kind of lock that in, and then I'll let it free ride from there, just in case we do see another run back up at all-time highs. But as I have mentioned, if we are sitting or starting to form into this similar type of descending channel structure that we do see that Bitcoin likes to form now and again, then I think it will be a really great time to be securing some profits and then moving that stop loss up to entry, just so we are locking some gains guaranteed. Now, the other thing I want to take a look at here is the total 3 market cap as well, because on the total 3 market cap, we can see that we're seeing alts move and inch closer and closer to that all-time high number here, but we haven't seen a ton of momentum quite yet. Now, of course, we are building some steady momentum, but it will be very telling to see what happens here at this level of resistance. We are potentially starting to look like we're wicking a little bit, so you might be getting rejected here in the short term. So even though Bitcoin is showing strength, we are not seeing the altcoin market show a similar type of strength, at least quite yet. So again, we'll have to see exactly what happens here, and if we can get a nice and strong break happening, this would be good. As I've mentioned, I do still think that we see some level of liquidity washing happening here, because again, even if we were to go back down to 108, that would liquidate almost $15 billion. So I do think having some level of liquidity washing event is possible before we see a sustained move to the upside, particularly within the alt markets. Now, again, you might be asking, well, why are you spending so much time focusing on Bitcoin? Well, it's because it's really important to understand what happens here to see kind of what happens here, right? I mean, if we see Bitcoin really take a strong move down to liquidate a lot of the long leverage in place here, well, it's going to be very hard for altcoins to sustain a move to the upside while something like that is happening, particularly if we were to see a violent move to capture a lot of this liquidity that will sow a lot of fear and panic within the altcoin market itself. So we would expect to see this move down a little bit. But one thing that I will say is very, very important to see here, and very, I would say, positive to see, is we can see actually right here, basically since, let's call it the middle of July, we've been in a relatively similar area, range trading, actually even now showing some upside momentum here. If we look at the similar type of thing with Bitcoin, basically since early July, we've been range trading and actually not even back to the levels that we saw in kind of that early to mid-July range. So actually, technically, from this type of perspective, we can see that altcoins have actually been outperforming Bitcoin in this short period of time relative. So they have been holding up quite well in this move. So that is, of course, very, very good news to see. And so even if we were to see a potential kind of flash crash to capture a lot of this liquidity on Bitcoin, so far at least, we are seeing altcoins hold up relatively well, which again does show kind of we're moving into a more altcoin season friendly season, and we are seeing altcoin strength. So I am very interested to see what happens next and how we hold this up over the next little while. So again, lots going on here in the market. I just want to kind of show you a lot of what we're seeing here with Bitcoin, how this is impacting altcoins, how we're starting to shift away from a purely Bitcoin dominated season. Again, we may not be there exactly quite yet, but I do think it's fairly clear to see that we are moving in that general direction. So if you are interested, as I mentioned, I did have that Bitcoin trade open. We were able to kind of capture and take advantage of some of the fear entering into the market, and now of course we are getting paid for that, which is good. If you are interested, of course, I do have all those links in the description below, links to Weex, BloFin, and then BTCC. BTCC does have the best deposit bonus, in my opinion, where you are getting 10% free on your money, which I think is a fantastic deal. So if you are interested, feel free to check those out in the description below. You can get signed up, all that type of stuff. Also, if you have any comments, questions, anything like that, I'd love to hear. How are you feeling about kind of Bitcoin, the altcoins relative to Bitcoin? What do you feel about this, the liquidity, the liquidations? Are we going to potentially be seeing a move to the downside to kind of sweep some of this liquidity? Do you think we're kind of in the middle of this short squeeze and it's up only from here? One thing I will say, though, that we have talked about many, many times before is when we do see confluence with those Bitcoin liquidations, usually we do see a move to the downside, even if it's just slight and momentary, though again, the timing on it is never exactly certain. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Also, I will be providing another update. As I mentioned, I am here in Singapore this week for Token 2049, so I'll be providing an update on all the things, kind of my main takeaways, some of the things I found quite important. All of that will be here on the channel in just a couple of days once I'm back at home and hopefully slightly recovered from the jet lag. So overall, hopefully you found the information useful. If you did, of course, you know what to do. And thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much.